There's a kind of calm that only comes with age, when you finally exchange the endless hustle for early mornings, wide-open spaces, and silence that stretches as far as the eye can see. Sandra and I weren't chasing thrill or adventure when we bought our 40-acre ranch out in Riverside County. We were chasing peace. A little patch of earth, a big sky, and a front porch where the only agenda was hot coffee and quiet thoughts. We'd earned it. The long commutes, the late-night meetings, the never-ending mortgage battles, they were all behind us. The ranch sat at the end of Cedar Creek Road, past the final streetlight, far beyond the reach and noise of the Maple Ridge HOA. And that wasn't coincidence. Before signing anything, we combed through every line of the deed and survey to make absolutely sure we were outside their jurisdiction. We'd seen too many friends end up miserable under the thumb of HOA zealots who treated mailbox colors like matters of national defense. That's why Patricia Cromwell's sudden interest in our property felt like a bad joke. She'd been Maple Ridge's self-proclaimed queen for years, ruling over her HOA kingdom like it was some personal fiefdom. The first time she wandered onto our pasture, I honestly thought she was just turned around. Happens out here, GPS gets confused. She waved like we were old church buddies, and Syrup Sweet said she didn't realize she'd stepped off public property. I pointed her back toward the road, exchanged polite words, and figured that was the end of it. But it wasn't. A week later, there she was again, this time with binoculars around her neck and an official-looking HOA windbreaker zipped up like she was on duty. She claimed she was birdwatching. The visit after that, she said she was conducting fire safety checks. Then it was something about documenting wildlife for their community newsletter. That newsletter, for the record, never materialized. That's when I put up the no trespassing signs, every 50 feet along the fence line, bold and impossible to miss. But Patricia walked right past them like they were lawn ornaments, and she wasn't alone anymore. She began dragging along other board members, clipboard carriers like Mitchell Graves, a man who looked like he'd never set foot off concrete in his life. They'd point at our barn, make comments about the garden beds, and once I even caught them snapping photos of our back deck while muttering something about community beautification. The final straw wasn't the trespassing itself. It was the arrogance that dripped from every word out of Patricia's mouth. When I confronted her, calm, collected, she smiled that tight, polished smile of hers and said she had a duty to maintain neighborhood standards, even on properties adjacent to community land. I pulled out our deed and showed her we weren't part of Maple Ridge. She waved it off, like it was a technicality, and suggested the board could vote to annex our property into the HOA. I actually laughed at first, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. 6 months into this slow invasion, we'd had enough. I installed a heavy-duty gate at the bottom of the ranch road, steel posts, keypad entry, cameras on poles. Not cheap, but cheaper than taking her to court. We figured that would finally be the end of Patricia's little field trips. We figured wrong. Instead of giving up, Patricia started parking outside the gate and scaling the fence like some kind of middle-aged action hero. She was in her 50s, maybe older, but climbed with the confidence of someone who believed the rules didn't apply to her. And in her little HOA kingdom, she probably thought they didn't. Then came last Tuesday, the day the dam finally broke. I was in town picking up fencing supplies. Sandra was home working remotely. Around 2 p.m., her phone buzzed with an alert from our security system. Patricia was back, dressed in her usual khaki pants and HOA polo, clipboard in hand, climbing over our fence with Mitchell trailing behind her, looking like a man who regretted everything. They marched up the driveway like they owned it, stopping every few feet to scribble notes, peering into our greenhouse, then circling around to the barn to try and peek inside. When they reached the workshop windows, they actually cupped their hands to the glass to look in. Sandra had been patient through everything, more than I ever could have been, but that was her line in the sand. She saved the footage, grabbed her keys, and stepped outside. Patricia and Mitchell were deep in conversation, likely plotting their next community improvement bulletin, when Sandra appeared behind them. Patricia spun around with that same rehearsed smile, saying how glad she was to catch someone home. Then she claimed she had concerns about our landscaping not matching the neighborhood aesthetic. Sandra didn't say a word. Sandra didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just walked right past Patricia and Mitchell down the drive, stepped through the open gate, and with a sharp beep and a solid click, locked it behind her. That sound cut through the still afternoon air like a gavel slamming down in court. Patricia froze. Mitchell's jaw tightened like he'd just swallowed something sour. Standing on the other side of the gate, Sandra spoke in a tone I'd never quite heard from her before, cold, measured, absolutely final. She told them they were trespassing yet again. She reminded them they'd ignored every warning, every posted sign, every legal notice. And then, without waiting for a reply, she turned on her heel and walked back toward the house. That's when Patricia snapped. She lunged toward the gate, grabbed the bars with both hands and rattled it like a cage door. Her voice broke through the quiet as she screamed that Sandra couldn't do this, that she was the HOA president, that she had rights. And when the gate didn't magically swing open for her royal decree, she did exactly what someone with a clipboard and a persecution complex would do. She dialed 911. Sandra heard everything. Patricia told the dispatcher she was being held hostage, that Sandra had locked the gate deliberately to trap her. She tossed out words like kidnapping and hostile situation like confetti. Sandra, unbothered, poured herself a cup of coffee and opened her laptop. 10 minutes later, the sound of tires on gravel broke the silence. Patrol cars rolled up, lights flashing. Patricia ran toward them as if salvation had arrived, waving her arms and shouting. She told the officers she'd been imprisoned, threatened, prevented from leaving. Mitchell hung a few steps back, shrinking a little with each word she screamed. Maybe he finally realized just how far off the rails this had gone. 2 officers stepped out, Daniels and Chen. Daniels had actually responded to one of our earlier trespassing calls, so he already knew the story. Patricia launched into her performance, all drama and breathless panic. But Daniels cut straight to the point with one question. Why were you on the property in the first place? Patricia straightened up, chin high, and pulled out her HOA badge like it was a police credential. She declared she had jurisdiction, that she was conducting an inspection, and that the HOA had a duty to protect the community's aesthetic values. It was almost impressive how completely detached from reality she was. That's when Sandra stepped back outside. Laptop under one arm, folder under the other, she greeted the officers with calm professionalism. Patricia tried to talk over her, but Daniels told her to keep quiet. Sandra handed over our deed, clearly marked, highlighted, proving beyond a shadow of doubt that our land was not and never had been part of the HOA. Then came the kicker, the security footage. Clip after clip, date-stamped and time-coded, showing Patricia climbing the fence, peering into our windows, wandering around with board members in tow. Trespass after trespass with cease and desist letters and prior police reports to match. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Officer Chen turned to Patricia and asked point-blank if she had climbed the fence that day. She hesitated, then mumbled something about how the gate was usually open, and she didn't think it was a big deal. Daniels looked back at Sandra and asked if she wanted to press charges. She didn't even blink. She handed him the cease and desist letter Patricia herself had signed 3 weeks earlier, clearly stating that any future entry would trigger legal action, and then Patricia made her worst. Mistake yet! She grabbed Officer Daniels by the arm, yelling that he was arresting the wrong person. He told her to let go. She squeezed tighter. That was all it took. Chen stepped in fast, pulled her back, and informed her she was under arrest for trespassing, filing a false police report, and assaulting an officer. Patricia lost it. She screamed that she knew the mayor. She threatened to have their badges. She shouted about conspiracies and corruption and community bylaws as if they were the U.S. Constitution. By the time the cuffs clicked around her wrists and she was face down in the gravel, the only thing she had left was her outrage, and even that was starting to crack. Mitchell just stood there, clutching his clipboard like a life preserver, eyes wide and speechless. When the officers loaded her into the cruiser, Patricia was still screaming about HOA rules as if they could bend reality to her will. Daniels stayed behind to finish the paperwork. He didn't sugarcoat it. Trespassing, false reporting, assault on a police officer, real charges. He said she could be facing up to 3 years and fines north of $10,000. As the patrol car disappeared down Cedar Creek Road, Patricia's voice echoed faintly from the distance, one last cry about being the HOA president, like it gave her divine authority. Sandra sat down on the porch, lifted her mug, and took a long, quiet sip of her coffee. Peace. Finally. At least until the next Maple Ridge newsletter lands in the mailbox. If this story gave you a laugh or a chill, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Real-life HOA nightmares like this are only just getting started.